your boy Luke here for our prize picks preview for round one of this year's Honda Classic, which this tournament holds a special place in my heart. It's our hometown event down here in Florida, event I've been to many a times. I've played this golf course more than a handful of times as well. So very familiar with, first off, the setup, of course the layout, and one of the weeks I look forward to every single year. Here in this video, we're going to be covering my top plays for round one of this event, a 5-pick parlay card that'll end up paying out 12.5x if it all hits when it's all said and done, to give you guys an idea of, first off, some of the research going into round one, and of course some of the picks that I'll be putting my money behind. The goal here, of course, is not just to give you a parlay to go out and tail. You can go ahead and do that if you want. Of course, the picks are out there, but more just to give you an idea of exactly what to expect in round one, the type of bets you can think about placing. And outside of my main 5 picks, I'll also be covering some of the props that I have my eyes on as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. All right, on the screen you can see the data golf profile for the Honda Classic, and first thing we want to take note of here is the scoring average. It was 1.1 shots over par per round last year, and honestly, that's about as good as it's going to get. On Thursday and Friday, we had relatively benign conditions last year. We had a 9 under par round in round one, that being Matt Jones, and Brendan Hagee took it to 8 under par on Friday. You're not really going to see that if the wind kicks up. It's a little bit too early to tell at this point, but in Florida, just expect the wind, right? In the afternoon particularly, you are going to see quite a bit of wind. So that means on Thursday and Friday specifically, I'm likely to try and target guys that are playing in the morning when you get that little bit more calm conditions. And of course, when the greens tend to run a little bit slower than they do in the afternoon in Florida. Another thing to note, of course, is going to be the driving accuracy and greens regulation numbers, where both of them are relatively close to the tour average. You can see just 1% difference between the driving accuracy here and what we see on the PGA Tour. A little bit of a bigger difference between the greens and regulation numbers, where it's slightly harder to hit them at PGA National, but at the same time, a 63.4% mark is pretty solid, right? There's courses where you see much lower numbers, like what we saw last week, or over there at Torrey Pines, where it was closer to 45 or even 50%. That means that the better iron players on tour, especially the players that are more equipped to play in the wind, I'm not foreseeing that many issues with hitting their greens or even their fairways for that matter. With all of that in mind, let's go over to the board for today and talk about some of my favorite plays on the slate, which first and foremost, we're going to start with the greens and regulation props. Of course, the two names I really have my eyes on going to be Louis Oosthuizen or Russell Knox. But a lot of these iron players up top, particularly the elite iron players, I would also consider taking as well. I mean, guys like a Sungjae Im, I'd consider going to Brooks, Daniel Berger. All of them would fit the same type of mold. Let's go ahead and start off with Russell Knox, who, yes, he's tied with a lot of these elite tier players, but there's been no one better in the field than Russell Knox with his irons over the last 50 measured rounds. If we take a look at that, he's getting over half a stroke per round in that category. But if we narrow that down to just the last 24 measured rounds, which seems to be a really good barometer for how these players are hitting the ball, he's hitting at a 0.91 shots gained approach per round rate. That's the best number in the world. This guy has just been on absolute fire with his iron play. And at a golf course that surrenders plenty of greens of regulation, that is something that I'm going to try and target. Another thing to note here is that Russell Knox is from Scotland. He's also one of the best wind players in all of the PGA Tour. When we've seen some of the most blustery conditions in the past, he's gone out there and still played some of his best golf. So for him to hit 2/3 of his greens of regulation, which is what the 12 number implies right here, that's something that I think he does at least 9 to 10 times out of 10 times. And of course the over, something closer to 70-80% of the time. So one of my favorite plays on the board, not something that I'd be willing to call a lock just because the conditions here at PGA National can get really tough really late. But as of right now, one of my favorite early leans on the board. Next up, we have Louis Oosthuizen, who is a much better player in terms of pedigree. I mean, much more name recognition with the Oosthuizen than what we have with the Russell Knox. The approach numbers, slightly worse than Russell Knox, especially from the long-term perspective, but he's much better off the tee. Also a much more well-rounded player in general. So somebody who, even though it isn't his specialty when it comes to hitting greens of regulation, at 12, I think that's much more than reasonable. He looked extremely sharp over there at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. That was his first event for quite some time. He went out there, made a cut, looked really solid with the putting, really solid with the ball striking as well. So for him to be at that same number, also somebody I'd consider taking. He hasn't had that much success at this golf course, and in fact hasn't even played this golf course all that often. But from a course fit perspective, somebody who, if the numbers historically, and we have a huge sample size for Oosthuizen mean anything, should be a good fit here. So I like the fact that he hits a ton of fairways, he keeps himself in position, and of course is one of the better iron players we see on tour. All right, guys, the next category on the board that we're targeting is going to be hole 3 shots. It's a par 5, 560, 580 yards, depending on where they put the tee location. In Brooks Koepka, these bombers, I'd also include somebody like a Daniel Berger in that conversation, even people like a Gary Woodland, Billy Horschel, Joaquin Niemann. These are all people I consider taking the under on. It's a relatively gettable par 5. About 55% of the field should make a birdie or better here. With his length, of course, the ball striking acumen that a Koepka brings to the table, somebody that I'm confident taking the under on. Another caveat, the reason why we're taking an under and really trying to force them into our cards is, of course, to get the 12.5x value. If we take all overs, as I'll show you right here in a second, it will change the payout to just 8x. If we take one under, it changes it to 10x. But if we try and get the perfect parlay, of course, it takes that to 12.5x. And there's plenty of unders I consider taking. Like I said, Brooks Koepka, a lot of these long hitters, the more aggressive players on tour, are people that I'd be more than comfortable taking the under on. There's a few people I'd consider taking over, right? Like a Jason Duffner, Matthew Wolff even, that's not very accurate off the tee, or even a little bit further down the board, like a Nick Watney or a Patrick Reed. But I'm a little bit more comfortable taking the overs on greens of regulation and a few of the other stats that we have here. So this is more of a category for me to try and target the unders for some of these bombers that I expect to hit this green in 2. Next up, we're going to go over to birdies or better. I should say back to birdies or better, I guess, which is going to be our next under. That is going to be Tommy Fleetwood under 4 birdies or better. Like I said before, the scoring average here is about 1.1 over par. And if we get windy conditions, could be even closer to 2.5 shots over par. Let's go ahead and assume that we have the worst possible case scenario. Let's assume that the weather on Thursday is perfect. You still have a scoring average that's over par. Most players are going to make 2-3 birdies at the very most. There's only 2 par 5s on the docket, which means if you're going to go out there and make 4 or 5 birdies, you're going to have to do it the hard way. Good old shots on par 3s, some of those long par 4s, and somebody like a Tommy Fleetwood, who we haven't seen play well on the PGA Tour for quite some time, I have more than enough question marks around him. I'm fading him in DFS, also fading him here on the prize picks board. If we take a look at his game log, he's been pretty decent over there on the European Tour, or I guess the DP World Tour at this point, especially over there in the Middle East. But those fields were weak. You were dealing with maybe 10 to 15 top-end players, and then outside that, just really low-tier players all around. So making a cut, posting a top 25 over there, not nearly as impressive as some of the guys over here on the PGA Tour. So I really like his chances to at the most push, right? 4 birdies is still asking a lot from any player in this field. Or of course, the very real possibility that he only puts up 2 or 3 like most of the field will. And now finally, our last prop on the board is going to be the bear trap shots, where we're taking an over on Nick Watney. And I don't understand why Nick Watney's always up on the board. I know Stefan makes all the props over there. Maybe he's a big Nick Watney fan. That might literally be the case because he's kind of irrelevant compared to all the other players on the board. I mean, obviously was in the top 5 of the world golf rankings at one point in his career, but that is a huge thing in the past. I mean, this hasn't been a case for quite some time, but he's still a pretty decent ball striker. The bear trap, if you guys aren't familiar, is holes 15 through 17 here at the Honda Classic. It is the hardest 3-hole stretch on the PGA Tour. It's 2 par 3s, a really hard par 4. Both the par 3s are almost 200 yards, carries over water. Hit one bad shot at the bear trap, and you're hitting the over, period. Obviously, if you par all 3 holes, that's more than possible for a lot of players in this field. You will end up hitting the under here, but a majority of players are going to get bit by the bear trap, particularly some of the lower end players like a Nick Watney, and even consider taking the over on somebody like a Patrick Reed, and consider taking the over on also a Tommy Fleetwood. I said I didn't expect him to have the best week. Also Jason Duffner. Some of the better players on tour, they might end up hitting the under at the bear trap, but that isn't something that I'm looking to target. I mean, most of the players in the field are going to hit the over here. That's why it's the hardest 3-hole stretch on the PGA Tour, and particularly if the conditions get tough. So on Thursday, on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if it ends up getting really tough, we get a lot of wind in the forecast, this might be a place to slam in the over. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do for round 1. Again, the weather forecast a little bit too far out into the future to go ahead and do a deep dive into. But even if the conditions are perfect for Thursday, Nick Watney, somebody I'd be considering taking the over on. Let's go ahead and finish up with a little bit of strategy talk. First off, we're doing a flex play as always with our 5-leg parlay. The hole 18 shot, that's also a par 5, a little bit more difficult than hole number 3 though. So if you're looking to take unders on one of these single hole stats, I'd rather be taking a look at number 3, which also has a lot more people on the board. If you go ahead and take a look at fairways hit, this is a course where it's relatively easy to hit fairways, so I wouldn't mind some of the overs here. The issue is that it's priced for the occasion. You can see a lot of guys up here at 9.5 fairways, or even down here at 8.5, where some of them were inaccurate drivers. So not really something that I see as being a huge advantage. Again, I'd much rather target this greens regulation where guys that are elite iron players like a Russell Knox and Louis Oosthuizen should hit their fair share out of fairways. Strokes, I'd be considering taking the over on most players. Again, the scoring average here is 71.1, and there's not one player in the field with a scoring average that's at that, right? 71 for Nick Watney would be the only guy even close to that scoring average. So trying to fade some of the guys that you don't think are a good course fit or you don't think have a very good week could be the way to go there. And with birdies are better, I'd be taking a lot of the unders. Like I said, it's a relatively hard golf course. And even in the easiest of conditions that you'll find here, getting to 4 or 5 birdies is a really tall task. That is all I've got for the Prize Picks preview. Before you go on and get out of here, go ahead and let me know down in the comments what your favorite prop on the board is, whether it was something that I mentioned during the video or something completely off of my radar. I'd love to hear from you guys. And as always for Prize Picks, going to have even more content throughout the week, whether it's our content for rounds 2 through 4. We're going to have plenty of other DFS content dropping on the channel as well. So to make sure you don't miss any of that coming in the future, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel so you guys get notified when that goes up. Of course, I really appreciate all of your support here on the channel, all of you that have liked the video, and of course, subscribe to the channel. We're growing really quickly here, getting close to 1,000 subscribers, so can't thank you guys enough. Good luck with all of your prop hunting for round 1, and let's get this cash, guys.